The year was 1607, and the air in London was thick with the scent of change. The world of chivalry and romance, once the heartbeat of English literature, was on the verge of a dramatic transformation. At the heart of this shift was the figure of John Gower, a name that had long been synonymous with the golden age of English poetry. Gower, alongside Chaucer, was revered as one of the founding fathers of English literature, a sage whose works had guided the moral and literary compass of the nation for centuries. But the winds of change were blowing, and Gower's once glorious legacy was about to be reimagined in a way that would shock and surprise even the most seasoned scholars. Berthollet, the king's printer, had long been known for his prestigious publications of classical texts and legal documents. His decision to publish Gower's Confessio Amantis in 1554 was a bold move, one that defied the conventional wisdom of the time. For Berthollet, Gower was not a relic of a bygone era, but a pioneering humanist whose work was as relevant to the 16th century as it had been to the 14th. He presented Gower's text in a format that echoed the prestigious editions of Sir Thomas Eliot's The Boke Named the Governor, a work that was highly regarded for its humanist ideals. Berthollet's edition of Gower was not a commercial venture. It was a statement of literary and intellectual importance, positioning Gower as a key figure in the English literary canon. However, the perception of Gower's work began to shift dramatically in the early 17th century. The publication of William Camden's Remains Concerning Britain in 1605 introduced the term Middle Ages to the English language, marking a period of cultural and literary decline between the classical era and the Renaissance. Camden's work, along with the growing influence of political ideas from Tacitus and Machiavelli, created a stark contrast between the modern world and the medieval past. This shift in perspective was further reinforced by the publication of Cervantes' Don Quixote in 1605, which became an instant sensation and was quickly translated into English. Cervantes' satirical portrayal of chivalric romance and his critique of the outdated literary forms of the Middle Ages resonated deeply with the English public. The impact of Don Quixote on the English literary scene was profound. Playwrights like George Wilkins, who collaborated with Shakespeare on Pericles, and Ben Jonson, Thomas Middleton, and Francis Beaumont were among the first to respond to Cervantes' work. Wilkins, in particular, showed a clear awareness of Don Quixote in his play, The Miseries of Enforced Marriage, where he referenced the famous episode of the knight tilting at windmills. This newfound awareness of the medieval past as a distinct and somewhat comical period influenced the way writers approached their craft. In Pericles, Shakespeare and Wilkins transformed Gower's Confessio Amantis into a play that emphasized the artificial and archaic elements of the source material. Gower, once a respected and learned poet, was now portrayed as a metrically awkward and somewhat comical figure, speaking in uneven octosyllabic couplets and orchestrating a series of dumb shows. The use of jousting, magical interventions, and ancestral armor further heightened the impression of a world that was both familiar and yet unmistakably medieval. This transformation was not unique to Pericles. Other playwrights, such as Thomas Middleton, who used a fictional medieval chronicler as the presenter in his play Hengist, King of Kent, and the team of Beaumont and Fletcher, who produced numerous tragicomic romances, also embraced this new sense of medievalism. These plays often featured exaggerated and stylized medieval elements, creating a world that was both nostalgic and critically aware of its own artificiality. Shakespeare's late plays, including Cymbeline and The Winter's Tale, reflected this trend. These works were characterized by a sense of antiquity and a heightened awareness of the fictive quality of the narratives. Shakespeare's adaptations of his sources, whether from Holinshed, Gower, or Chaucer, consistently accentuated the archaic elements, creating a dreamlike and symbolic quality that was distinct from his earlier works. The collaboration between Shakespeare, Wilkins, and Fletcher in The Two Noble Kinsmen further exemplified this shift. The play, based on Chaucer's The Knight's Tale, featured a medieval world governed by honor and fortune, where the characters appealed to Mars, Venus, and Diana. The play's prologue, with its ventriloquising of Chaucer and its elaborate medieval ceremonies, such as the arming of the heroes and the grand knightly combat, created a world that was both familiar and deliberately stylized. As the early 17th century unfolded, the perception of the medieval past was undergoing a profound transformation. What had once been a revered and integral part of English literary heritage was now seen through a lens of ironic nostalgia, a world that was both admired and critiqued. The works of Shakespeare and his contemporaries captured this shift, creating a new literary landscape that was both a tribute to the past and a reflection of the changing times. Renaissance writers often looked back to the past for inspiration, reusing and adapting old material in new ways. This relationship between the past and the present is especially interesting when considering the works of Shakespeare and the medieval period. The advent of printing technology played a crucial role in how this past was preserved and reused, bridging what we now see as distinct literary periods, the medieval and the Renaissance or early modern. In the century following William Caxton's introduction of the printing press to England in 1476, early printers developed a culture of reissuing popular and successful works. This meant that books, which were expensive and durable, remained in circulation for longer periods. The result was a rich and layered presence of the past, where older texts and ideas continued to influence new works. This process of reprinting and retaining books allowed a broader audience to access and engage with the literary heritage that was previously limited to elite, multilingual readers of manuscripts. These early printing practices created a dynamic environment where the past was not just preserved, but also transformed. Texts were copied, translated, abridged, expanded, illustrated, and combined in various ways. This ongoing mediation of the past made it a living part of the cultural landscape, rather than a static, distant era. As a result, the literary past remained vivid and accessible, influencing the works of writers like Shakespeare. For example, when Shakespeare wrote his plays, he drew on a wide range of sources, many of which were products of this active and ongoing engagement with the past. The reprints and translations of medieval texts made these sources available to a broader audience, including Shakespeare himself. This process of mediation allowed Shakespeare to integrate medieval themes, characters, and narratives into his works, creating a rich tapestry of old and new. One specific example is the Requiem of the Histories of Troy, a popular medieval text that was frequently reprinted. This book, which combined various legends and historical accounts of Troy, was a key source for Shakespeare's understanding of classical mythology and history. The repeated publication of this text ensured that it remained a familiar and influential part of the literary landscape. Similarly, Shakespeare's play Coriolanus draws on medieval sources that were mediated through early print culture. The story of Coriolanus, a Roman general, was part of a rich tradition of historical and legendary narratives that were translated and adapted over the centuries. These prints and translations provided Shakespeare with a wealth of material to draw from, allowing him to create a complex and nuanced portrayal of a historical figure. In essence, the advent of printing technology and the culture of reissuing and retaining books played a crucial role in keeping the medieval past alive and relevant. This dynamic relationship between the past and the present is evident in the works of Shakespeare, where the medieval and the early modern are not distinct periods, but overlapping and interconnected phases of literary history. When we use the term medieval, it's important to remember that it means different things in different times and places. The term often carries a historical weight that doesn't always align with literary studies. The idea of a clear break between the medieval and Renaissance periods, often attributed to 19th century historians like Jacob Burckhardt, can be misleading. This narrative of sudden change obscures the fact that literature evolved in a more fluid and unpredictable way during the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. Authors often drew on recent texts, even when claiming to revive ancient ones. Since the 1990s, scholars have increasingly focused on continuity rather than rupture in literary history. However, this shift has left us with challenges in evidence and methodology, especially in editorial practices. For example, the century after William Caxton, often dismissed as a drab age by C.S. Lewis, was actually a period of intense literary activity. Despite this, it has been largely overlooked in academic curricula. The physical deterioration of texts, limited access, and the misleading nature of digital archives like early English books online EBO have made these works difficult to read and understand. The term medieval itself is a retrospective construction, as Ruth Morse suggests, There were no Middle Ages, but we cannot do without them. This applies to other period categories, like Shakespeare, which are also constructed retrospectively. The key is to question how these terms shape our understanding of literary history. While studies of influence have been valuable in identifying medieval origins in Renaissance literature, they often focus on specific lines of connection. A broader approach is needed to understand the pervasive medieval background that shaped early modern literature. Shakespeare, for instance, often drew on common medieval ideas and tropes, assuming his audience was familiar with them. This medieval horizon of expectations influenced how Shakespeare's works were received and interpreted. For example, the belly passage in Shakespeare's Coriolanus has medieval roots that are often overlooked. Similarly, the Requiem of the Histories of Troy, a medieval book reprinted in the late 16th century, shows how medieval interpretations of classical stories were reimagined. These reprints and Shakespeare's works both reflect a medieval lens through which the past was understood. Instead of focusing solely on direct influence, we should consider the broader conditions that shaped literary continuity and change. Recent theories, such as Weichi-Dimmock's concept of resonance, offer ways to understand both continuity and change without assuming a causal relationship. Literary continuity and change are constructed through material texts, and certain textual conditions, like frequent reprinting, can encourage continuity, while others, like translation, can encourage change. The conditions of early printing and Elizabethan theater share some significant parallels. Both Caxton and Shakespeare faced the challenge of appealing to a mixed, diverse audience. Caxton addressed this by offering a variety of genres and styles, while Shakespeare's plays blended different styles and characters to appeal to a wide audience. The expansion of production capacity in both early print and Elizabethan theater also led to similar strategies. Early printers like Caxton and his successors expanded their offerings by reprinting and translating foreign materials. Shakespeare, too, drew on a wide range of sources, including foreign works. This widespread use of foreign and reprinted materials shaped the literary culture of the time, making certain narrative structures and themes familiar to readers and audiences. Both Caxton and Shakespeare also used metatextual and metatheatrical techniques to draw attention to the production process. Caxton's paratexts often discuss the production of the text, and Shakespeare's plays frequently reference the theatrical process itself. These techniques reflect a broader trend in literary practice, where the means of production and the roles of various participants were highlighted. The mixed economic situations of early printers and Elizabethan dramatists also led to similar strategies. Printers combined commercial sales with patronage, and Shakespeare's work similarly balanced commercial and patronage-based performances. The combination of these economic models influenced the content and form of the works produced. The introduction of new information technology, like the printing press, created a demand for content. Early printers filled this demand by reprinting and translating existing works, often from French sources. The dominance of Francophone texts and printers in early English print culture meant that many works were translations from French, reflecting the international nature of early print culture. This had long-term consequences for literary culture in England, making medieval and French-influenced materials a significant part of the literary landscape. In the Elizabethan period, the expansion of public theaters created a similar demand for content. Shakespeare and his contemporaries responded by drawing on a wide range of sources, including medieval and foreign works, to create plays that appealed to a diverse audience. The conditions of early printing and Elizabethan theater, therefore, shaped the ways in which medieval and foreign materials were used and reinterpreted, influencing the literary continuity and change of the period. Shakespeare's work is deeply intertwined with the texts and ideas of the past, particularly those that were preserved and reprinted during the medieval and early modern periods. The influence of French literature and culture, especially through printed works, played a significant role in shaping the literary landscape of Shakespeare's time. Many French authors, such as Alain Chartier, Pierre Gringoire, and Christine de Pizan, were widely read and reprinted in England. Although these works were not direct sources for Shakespeare, they contributed to the cultural and literary context in which he wrote. For example, the various retellings of ancient stories like Dido and Aeneas or the Rape of Persephone were available in multiple versions. each offering different perspectives and interpretation. This variety enriched the literary repertoire, allowing writers like Shakespeare to draw on a rich tapestry of ideas and narratives. The persistence of medieval texts was also due to the durable nature of books. Unlike today, books were not considered disposable items but were kept, passed down, and reread, often for generations. This meant that medieval ideas and stories continued to circulate and influence writers well into the Renaissance and beyond. One of the most significant examples of this is the Recueil of the Histories of Troy, the first book printed in English by William Camden in 1473 to 1474. This book, which retold the story of Troy, was heavily influenced by medieval Burgundian culture and was reprinted multiple times over the next 2 centuries. The story of Troy was particularly important in early modern England because it was often used to legitimize claims to power and heritage. Caxton's translation was commissioned by Margaret, Duchess of Burgundy, and her influence is evident in the book's dedicatory prologue, which lists her extensive titles and territories. The loss of these territories in the late 15th century added a layer of nostalgia and historical significance to the text, making it a powerful symbol of a lost golden age. The Recueil was reprinted several times, and each edition reflected the changing cultural and religious landscape of England. For example, the 1596 edition, revised by William Fiston, added a Calvinist moral perspective, emphasizing the dangers of adultery and vice as causes of war. This shift in interpretation shows how medieval texts were continuously reinterpreted and adapted to fit new contexts. Shakespeare's use of the Recueil in plays like Troilus and Cressida and 2 Henry VI demonstrates how these medieval texts remained relevant and influential. The story of Troy, as mediated through the Recueil, provided a framework for understanding themes of empire, warfare, and political power. The play Troilus and Cressida, in particular, explores the ambiguous relationship between personal morality and the causes of war, a theme that was richly layered with medieval interpretations. Similarly, in Coriolanus, Shakespeare engages with medieval political theories through the use of the belly fable, a metaphor that was well known in medieval literature. The fable, which uses the body to represent the state, was a way to explore issues of governance and social order. By drawing on these medieval interpretations, Shakespeare added depth and complexity to his exploration of Roman political theory, creating a play that was both a commentary on classical ideas and a reflection on contemporary political issues. In both Troilus and Cressida and Coriolanus, Shakespeare demonstrates how the medieval past continued to shape and enrich his understanding of the world, even as he engaged with new and emerging ideas. The persistence of medieval texts and ideas, preserved through the medium of print, allowed Shakespeare to draw on a rich and varied literary heritage, creating works that were both timeless and deeply rooted in the cultural context of his time. Shakespeare's play, Coriolanus, reimagines a well-known fable about the body politic, a story that was widely known and discussed in medieval times. This fable, often called the belly fable, tells of a rebellion by the body's limbs against the belly, which they see as lazy and greedy. The belly, in turn, explains that it nourishes all the other parts, and when the limbs stop feeding it, the whole body suffers and eventually dies. This story was used by writers like John of Salisbury and Christine de Pizan to illustrate the importance of mutual cooperation and hierarchy in society. John of Salisbury, in his work Polycraticus, presents a detailed analogy of the body politic. The prince is the head, the senate is the heart, judges and governors are the eyes and ears, soldiers are the hands, and financial officers are the stomach and intestine. He warns that if the financial officers become too greedy, they can bring the whole body to ruin. This medieval view emphasizes a strong sense of mutual obligation and the need for each part to fulfill its role. Christine de Pizan, in her Book of the Body of Policy, offers a more radical take. She includes the people as part of the body, not just the elite. In her version, the belly complains that the limbs do not feed it enough, and the limbs rebel because they are overworked and underfed. Christine argues that if a prince overburdens the people, it will lead to rebellion and the downfall of the entire society. Her message is clear: rulers must treat their people with care and respect. William Caxton, in his widely read Aesop's Fables, presents a version of the belly fable that emphasizes the consequences of greed and the importance of cooperation. In Caxton's telling, the limbs refuse to feed the belly, leading to the starvation of the whole body. However, his moral lesson shifts to a more personal level, advising that a servant should faithfully serve their master to receive good rewards. This moral, while different from the others, still underscores the need for mutual support and responsibility. When Shakespeare wrote Coriolanus, he drew on these medieval versions of the belly fable, but reinterpreted them for his own purposes. In the play, the fable is used by Menenius to calm the angry citizens, but it also highlights the tensions and failures within the Roman body politic. Menenius' version of the fable, while trying to restore order, ultimately fails to address the real grievances of the people. The play shows that the ideal of a harmonious, mutually supportive body politic, as envisioned by medieval writers, is difficult to achieve in a society rife with inequality and corruption. Shakespeare's Coriolanus thus stands as a critique of both medieval and contemporary political ideals. By revisiting and reworking the belly fable, Shakespeare reveals the complexities and contradictions of power, hierarchy, and mutual obligation in a society. The play suggests that the failure to live up to these ideals can lead to the disintegration of the body politic, much like the body in the fable that perishes from internal strife.